this video, we're going to classify quadrilaterals based on their attributes. So remember, quadrilaterals are any polygon that have at least 4 sides. So remember, a polygon, we learned yesterday, has to have at least 3 connecting sides. That's an N. That's okay. 3 connecting sides. So it has to be a closed figure. So for example, that would not be a polygon. That is not a polygon. You have to have it closed. Now, a quadrilateral, that word quad, as we learned yesterday, means 4. So a quadrilateral just must have 4 sides. So let's dive into this very first one. As you can see here, we have this odd looking thing here. Now, none of the sides have the little tick marks on them. So that tells us that none of these are parallel or congruent. None of the sides are equal, and none of the angles are equal. So if we're just taking a look at this, everything on here is going to be a polygon because they're all quadrilaterals. This one has no other name except quadrilateral. It is a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides. That's it. Nothing else to it. Make sure you are writing quadrilateral and 4 sides in your box. Let's move on to this next one here. This one we're going to draw on some lines right here and right here. Oh, let's just do one. I take that back. We're going to draw a line there and a line here. Now these lines with those little arrows like that, that means that those 2 lines are parallel. Remember, the word parallel means that if they were to go on forever and ever and ever and ever, they would never intersect. They're always going to be the same distance apart. So since those 2 lines are parallel, that means this is going to be right angles, which really doesn't matter, but it's a good thing to kind of think about. So since we've got 2 parallel lines, this is going to be a trapezoid. Trapezoid. Now, a trapezoid is a polygon, a quadrilateral with at least 1 set of parallel sides. At least 1 set of parallel sides. Underline that, at least. That is really important as we get started into this. Trapezoids have at least 1 set of parallel sides. So while this is a trapezoid, it's also a quadrilateral. I'm going to go ahead and write that at the bottom here. Oh, I cannot spell today. Let's try that again. Quadrilateral. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and write that at the bottom to remind myself that it's a trapezoid, but it's also a quadrilateral, and it's a polygon. We're going to have to start naming everything that these shapes are. Let's look at that next one. So this one, as you can see, these 2 lines, let's draw it in pink. This line is congruent with this line, and this line is congruent with this line. So it has 2 sets of congruent parallel sides. 2 sets of congruent parallel sides. So this is a parallelogram. Parallelogram. Is that an A or an O? Uh-oh. We're going to make it an A. Parallelogram. Probably an O. That's okay. It's a parallelogram because it has 2 sets of parallel and congruent sides. Make sure you are taking notes. You can always pause the video at any point you need to and take those notes. This is a parallelogram because it has 2 sets of parallel and congruent sides. Now, since it's a parallelogram, it's also a trapezoid, and it's a quadrilateral. It's a trapezoid because it has at least 1 set of parallel sides, and it's a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides. Let's get a little more specific. If you haven't noticed yet, each one of those is getting more and more and more specific. So let's jump into the next one. As you can see with this next one, these lines are parallel and congruent, and these lines are parallel and congruent. So we have two sets of parallel and congruent sides. So you might be like, oh, it's a parallelogram, but wait, we also have 4 right angles. And since we have 4 right angles, this is a rectangle. Now, even though it's a rectangle, it's also a parallelogram and a trapezoid and a quadrilateral. It is all of those things. It is a rectangle because it has 2 sets of parallel and congruent sides and 4 right angles. It's a parallelogram because it has 2 sets of parallel and congruent sides. It's a trapezoid because it has at least 1 set of parallel sides. And it's a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides. Let's jump into the next one. All right, so as you can see down here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sides that are parallel and congruent. So 4 sides that are parallel and congruent. Not 2 sets, 4 sides that are parallel and congruent. Now, there are no right angles. These angles are the same size, and these angles are the same size. So no right angles, so it can't be a rectangle. This is a rhombus. Rhombus. So we're looking for other things we could call it. It can't be a rectangle because there's no right angles, but it can be a parallelogram and a trapezoid because it has at least 1 set of parallel sides. And of course, a quadrilateral. Looks good, looks good. And this last one, you should be able to identify this last one super easy. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of parallel sides, or 4 sides that are parallel. So 4 sides parallel and congruent. And as you can see, we have 4 right angles. 4 right, that's not an R. 4 right angles. Looks good, looks good. Since we have 4 sides that are parallel and congruent and 4 right angles, this is a square. But we could also call it a rhombus because it has 4 congruent and parallel sides. We could call it a rectangle because it has 2 sets of congruent and parallel sides and right angles. We could call it a parallelogram because it has 2 sets of parallel sides. And we could call it a trapezoid because it has at least 1 set of parallel sides. And we could call it a quadrilateral. As you can see, a square is everything. Now it's time to dive into some questions. Has 4 congruent sides. So in the box that comes up, I want you to tell me which ones have to have 4 congruent sides. There are 2 shapes. Which ones have to have 4 congruent sides? In your chat box, I hope you put rhombus. Let's write in a different color. Rhombus, because it has to have 4 congruent sides, and a square. You might think of a rhombus as a square that's kind of been smushed a little bit. Rhombus and square, 4 congruent sides. Let's look at that next question. Has 4 right angles? Which 2 shapes have to have 4 right angles? I hope you said square and rectangle. Your square and your rectangle have to have 4 right angles. Number 3, opposite sides are congruent and parallel. So take a look up through here. Which one has to have opposite sides that are congruent and parallel? Congruent and parallel sides. This is a hard one. There are 3 of them. So for this one, I'd say this is a very challenging question Because for the trapezoid, it has to have at least one set of parallel congruent sides. But your parallelogram has, let's read that question again. Opposite sides. Since it says sides, that makes me think that they need to all be parallel. So that would be parallelogram has opposite sides that are parallel and congruent. Rectangle also has opposite sides that are parallel and congruent, but so does rhombus and so does square, and there's only 3 blanks. Let's write them all in. We've got the parallelogram. We've got the rhombus, rectangle, and the square. Beautiful. Remember to back the video up if you have any questions, and it's time to get started on that classwork.